What's up, folks? Welcome to my channel. Just wanted to pop in here really quick before we start the video and ask you to please subscribe, like, comment, all that good stuff. That's what feeds the algorithm monster and keeps this thing going. If you're interested in the audio versions of the podcast, of course, we are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all those good places. We sell our t-shirts and stuff like that I wear during the show on justworkco.com. You can find me on all the social platforms pretty much at I am Dave Hurt, and you can follow the podcast Instagram at the Free Mind Podcast. All right, that's enough. I hope you guys enjoy this video, and I appreciate you. I was just sitting here noticing how many white hairs I have, and it's so depressing. And they like grow faster and stick out. It's so bad. Don't get old, Blaire.
You can always dye them.
I know, but then I feel like that's just kind of admitting defeat, you know? Like
maybe a little bit, yeah.
and then people are like, no, keep them. It makes you look wise and stuff. And I'm like, I don't know. It's just depressing. Anyway,
Oh, wow.
How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Yep, I'm doing well, thanks. Welcome, Blaire White, to Free Mind Podcast. I'm already recording, by the way, so
Cool.
we can just go ahead and roll right into it. And I mean, I can start it wherever you want, but the show in general is pretty laid back, pretty informal, conversational. And I posted on my story asking if people had questions for you, and I've never got more questions for a guest. So I got
Really?
Yeah, I got a ton. People have a lot of
Lord.
questions. Yeah. So
Cool.
all right, my friend. First off, introduce yourself briefly for folks who may not know who you are, even though they probably do.
Yeah, so my name is Blaire White. I'm a YouTuber. I'm a social and political commentator, a public speaker, and I'm most known for approaching LGBT issues from a perspective as a trans person myself that is a bit more rare. I am center right, and so feel a little bit of a niche there on YouTube, but yeah, that's me.
Yeah. So question I had first off that I wanted to ask you, and so first off, I've been a huge fan of your content for quite a while. And
really?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. I've always asked myself, though, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, like, why aren't there more people like you? Why are you so rare in the trans community? Because when you look at sort of the spectrum of political leanings in general, right, like there's a pretty even distribution, but in the trans community, you're pretty darn unique. And I've always been fascinated by that. So why do you think that is?
Well, I'm definitely not going to sit here and deny the fact that most people in the LGBT community are at the very least left-leaning. And, even further than that, most are pretty far left. However, I don't think I'm as rare as people may think. I think that, it's sort of hard to be that person that's trying to bridge a gap between the right and the left as a trans person. And a lot of trans people, for the most part, and we're talking actual trans people, not like, trendy green hair, armpit hair.
I want to ask you about that stuff too.
Yeah, trans for attention. Actual trans people typically who transition, their goal is very much to blend into society and not raise a ruckus and just be a normal person. So right off the bat, just based on the fact that we tend to be more soft-spoken, it leaves the podium open for crazy people to speak for us. And a lot of trans people are also afraid of the right. I think that a lot of them have this perception that they wouldn't have many allies there, that say they wanted to speak out against leftism or, radical gender ideology, but are they really going to have like a home on the right? But for me, I've never held a position or, I've never tried to be a part of a group. I've always just called it like I saw it. And, to me, it doesn't matter if, and this isn't the case, but it wouldn't matter if every person on the right didn't like trans people or didn't understand trans people. That has nothing to do with what positions I may hold. And I've also always been very much of the mind that I'm not really quite sure what being trans has to do with like my perspective on foreign policy, the economy, COVID regulations. So, you know, it's there's more of me than you would think, but most of them aren't willing to really take the slings and arrows that comes with being outspoken. I think also because they see the shit that I get. I'm sorry, I don't know
Mm.
if I should swear on here.
Oh
My bad.
no, yeah, you can swear all you
Okay.
want. I swear too.
Okay. A lot of them see the shit that I get, which is, sometimes some pretty intense hate. And it's kind of a net negative for them to take that upon themselves, which can be frustrating for me because it sucks to feel like I'm the only one. But I mean, if I ever go, I'm constantly having, LGBT people come up to me in public and say thank you. So there's more than people think.
Yeah, I was actually curious if you get kind of, because I experienced this, and honestly, it's just from people who are afraid to even say that they lean one way politically or not, or they're opposed to like mandates, for example. I get that
Yeah.
kind of thing, but I was curious if you've had messages essentially from trans people who say, I believe what you're saying, but I'm just scared to speak up about it. I'm sure you get that.
Yeah. And quite
Yeah.
a lot of famous ones too.
Mm.
A lot of, and that's what I have to swallow my pride a little bit. And I wish they would be outspoken because if there was more of us, then, my thought process wouldn't be seen as so radical. The only reason why it seems so radical or there is this like sort of front that it's rare is because no one else is willing to really speak up. But who knows? That may change in the future.
Yeah, I think the more people like you speak up, it's just going to happen more and more. I mean, we've kind of seen that with black Republicans, for example, or black conservatives, just sort of more being willing to speak up and despite the fact that in general they do catch a lot of shit from the black community, uh, being called names and stuff. But anyway, I was just kind of curious about that because I I come from a background, like my background is in the sciences. And so I've always approached the gender debate, if you want to call it that, from that perspective. And I always found everything that you said to just make sense to me in terms of my background in biology. And it always just kind of shocked me that more trans people didn't feel that way. And so I was curious about that because
Yeah.
it just makes sense to me. And I try to remove my sort of preconceived notions about things from the equation and give people the benefit of the doubt. But a lot of it does seem to just be kind of going with it, with whatever the narrative of the week is or what have you. And you've always really kind of stuck to your message and not wavered in that. So it's a breath of
Yeah,
fresh air.
I think that it's been sort of a progression to this point where the topic of, transsexuals is so far removed from the science that we once held to be just evident truths about transsexuals and the state of having gender dysphoria, et cetera. I think that once it became so heavily politicized,
Hmm.
that's when the BS starts with anything. Same with the virus. In another world, we would have all been able to sort of unite around the fact that coronavirus is real. It's not like it's fake. I'm not one of the people who thinks it's like a huge problem at all. But in a more healthy society, we all could have been like, okay, this affects everyone. No need to politicize it. But
Yeah.
then you have the left doing lockdowns, and then obviously that's going to trigger like pro-liberty people, and then you have the masks and conflicting messages based on which state or country you live in. That's when things get messy. So the same thing has happened with trans issues, and it's unfortunate, but I just like with the virus, I would like to actually get back to the point of relying on actual science. And I think that it actually serves trans people a lot better to adhere to the science and to be able to acknowledge certain things that are scientifically accurate. And, I think that taking that out of the equation actually makes it harder for people to understand us rather than easier.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And of course I get told when I try to talk about things like this on my channel or in my content, I'm essentially told, shut your mouth. You're a
Of
straight white
course.
man. You don't get to have an opinion. So
Of course.
that's why it's also so powerful to have people like you who are willing to talk about this stuff, especially detransitioning and stuff like that, which I want to get into in a little bit. But
Yeah.
um, first off, this was like the number one question I was getting from people for you. And that is, I guess there was a recent memo or letter from the governor of Texas about trans youth and undergoing I guess, hormonal changes early as being essentially child abuse based on current Texas law. I guess this is like a recent development. A lot of people were asking what your thoughts are on that. So I guess in general, we could just say, do you think that what are your thoughts, I guess, on starting, say, really early in life with at least just puberty blockers for some of these kids? And I mean, they're saying it's child abuse in Texas now, and I know that's your home state. So I think that's why people were asking.
I think that at the very least, it's very dangerous to give kids puberty blockers, hormones, and at the worst, surgeries at a young age. And there's this really, really messed up gaslighting that occurs from activists who will say, would you rather have a trans kid or a dead kid? They will often use this argument and say that if you don't let your kid transition, they will kill themselves. And I think that is such toxic emotional blackmail to do to parents who, of course, are going to want to do anything they can to keep their kid alive if you're presenting them with these two options, which it's a false dichotomy. It's like, really, there's no gray area between sterilizing your kid or your kid killing themselves. Like, why are we setting that up? And why are we causing that psychosis even in the kids? It's like, if you tell kids things, they're sponges. They believe it. If you tell a kid transition or you're going to kill yourself, I can't imagine why they wouldn't have suicidal thoughts because of that. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, in my opinion. When it comes to kids getting these, procedures and therapies, which range from semi-permanent to sometimes permanent outcomes, you have young girls as young as 14 and 15 removing their breasts, going on testosterone, young boys going on hormones and becoming sterilized for life. This is one of those things that I believe we're going to look back in history and say, you know what? That was really messed up that we let that happen, at least to the extent that which we had it happen. This is an issue with a lot of gray area as well, because I've met trans people who transitioned at extremely young ages and they're very happy. But then I also have so many people reaching out and saying, I transitioned at this age, now I'm detransitioning, but I don't have breasts anymore, but my voice is messed up for life, but I can't have kids forever because of a decision I made as a teenager. So clearly there's no easy answer for this, but I know that the answer is most definitely not going back to removing the science from this, because how can you accurately diagnose someone to say for sure that they're not going to regret these decisions if you're not even acknowledging that you have to have a gender dysphoria diagnosis, that you shouldn't be talking to therapists that are activists? That's a really big problem as well. Like a lot of these people that get involved in this field are very much activists, which again is, inserting the politics. And so unfortunately, the political football in this situation are kids. And, the detransitioner issue is escalating and escalating. There's more than ever, and they're all young. So it's sad, and it's sad to know that, transitioning is not perfect. It's never been perfect. But for the most part, when we were in a situation where it was mostly adults doing it, we didn't have these levels of regret that we have now. And it's really sad to me.
Yeah. Again, like coming from the scientific background that I have, and also my life experience, which is I've used anabolic steroids quite a bit as a grown man. And I even then essentially taking more of what I already have, right? Accentuating my maleness with exogenous testosterone. I took so seriously, and I waited until after I had my first child, even to do that. And that's what really scares me, is how flippant we are with the introduction of exogenous hormones into people's bodies that are that young. It's like, it's such a straight up lie if you're going to say there are no consequences to even something like blocking puberty. That's just like people saying that these vaccines have no long-term consequences. It's like, how can you actually say that? This is a completely straight up lie. Like, you don't have long-term data on the vaccine. You can't say it. Just like you cannot say introducing hormones into a child's body won't have an effect, right? It's just, that's what's always...
We're blocking them.
Yeah, we're blocking them. Just in this whole narrative of, oh, you can just block puberty, and then if they come off them, it'll just resume essentially back where it was. Like, that is not the case. I'm sorry. Like, it really stinks, because I have a child, and I'm sure you're familiar with Abigail Schreier's work, and she's gotten raked across the coals for this stuff. And I have a young girl, and I worry about, like, how do I approach these things as she starts to get older and have friends, and, you know, like the work that Abigail covered, it's terrifying. And when you're having, like what you said, essentially activist therapists who are sort of pushing them in this direction, it's really scary to me. And again, I'm thankful that there are people like you who are willing to talk about it and speak up, because as soon as I open my mouth, it's, you know, shut up, dumb, dumb guy. You don't know what you're talking about. And it's maddening. It truly is maddening, especially when you're like, I understand the endocrinology of this, and you guys are lying to the public, essentially.
Yes.
So,
And you know what? I very much appreciate that you understand the endocrinology and that you are approaching it from science. But it's so funny because I don't think you even really need to understand
no.
it on that deep of a level to understand that maybe halting the development of children could have some like side effects later on, or sterilizing a child before they're legally allowed to drive or get a tattoo or get a piercing may not be the right thing to do, you know? So it's like, it sucks that so many people just seem to be, there's this weird also psychosis with like medicalization of people and of children, right? Like you see it with like kids getting put on pills for OCD, ADHD by the time they're 6, you know? I actually come from a background of, when I was young, I grew up in a very tumultuous household, and it wasn't a household that was very conducive to me being a happy kid, at least for most of it. And I had my mom who took me to a therapist, and they were diagnosing me with just a litany of things like, this is why your kid's sad, right? And it's like, actually, I was sad because I was growing up in a crappy household, and we're scapegoating, and we're putting a 6-year-old on pills. Like, it's not, we shouldn't be okay with the idea of people being on medication for the rest of their lives. And what you have to understand, especially in the context of trans people, is you are medicalized for the rest of your life from that point on. And yes, you can detransition, and I'm putting quotes because a lot of the stuff you can't undo. Like, even if I try to detransition right now, I don't think I could do it. And also I would still be sterile for the rest of my life.
Right.
And you know, the idea that a child can be set up to be on pills for the rest of their life when they're 11, 12, 13, it's like, what are we doing? I can't imagine this is going to be looked back upon in history as a positive thing.
It's awful. We've sacrificed reason for essentially people's feelings and emotion, and the fear of offending is flying in the face of science in so many areas of our lives these days. You know, the trans thing, of course, with children, but then the vaccine stuff. I mean, there's so many areas of, and this is why basically I sort of got into doing this, and I didn't want to be outspoken politically or on the culture wars or any of that stuff, but it's just, there comes a point where you're like, okay, I have to say something about this stuff.
Yeah.
And it truly is maddening. And I do think we will, like you said, get to a point in the future where we look back and we're like, holy shit, what were we doing? I mean, at least I hope we will get to a point like that. Like, Blaire, I have former colleagues, so I'm not in the sciences anymore. I was in research labs like through a lot of my early 20s and stuff. And I have former colleagues in endocrinology. Like, I worked on growth hormone and IGF-1 and those systems. And these people know endocrinology very well. And I'll ask them about these topics. I'll say, can you believe that they're pushing puberty blockers in young children? And they're uncomfortable talking about it. They won't talk about it, even with the scientific expertise they have. They will not talk about it, and they'll err on the side of, well, you know, it's let people do what they want with their lives. And I'm like, this is children.
Children.
They don't get a say. If look, my 4-year-old, almost 5-year-old daughter spent most of this morning telling me she was a puppy. These are children. Let them be children, you know. But anyway,
and I can say, even as, you know, a trans person who's very much happy with every decision I've made in the context of being trans and in my transition. And I feel as though it opened my life up in so many ways, and I'm a successful, happy person with it. Even I know in my heart that at 13, 14, 15, I was not ready. You're already going through so much at that age. I mean, I feel like we have almost this like a lot of people, when you become an adult, you have this romanticization of like your teenage years.
Hmm.
But like even the best of childhoods, it's kind of a dark time being a teenager. You're very confused. Your hormones are all over the place. You're not making the right decisions no matter how hard you try. And the idea of throwing like switching your gender into the middle of that is just crazy. And I'm saying that as someone who eventually did. So,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, it's crazy. And the vaccine stuff as well, you know, it's like I don't think a healthy society sacrifices children for the elderly. I
No.
just don't. I
No.
think that the fact that we are, you know, giving kids the vaccine when they are almost completely, you know, non-susceptible to any serious ramifications of having COVID is insane to me. I couldn't imagine being a parent right now. I can imagine what you go through as a parent in these times. And even just as simple as, you know, I live in Texas, and I was talking to a friend at dinner last night, and she has kids, and her kids are still in masks, you know,
In
little
Texas.
kids
In
still
Texas.
in masks. And then
Yeah.
you have the Oscars and the Super Bowl and these huge events with people. It's like, what is happening? And it's even scarier that, you know, now obviously the war machine's gearing up. So people are everyone's declaring, oh, COVID's over. That's almost scarier that we're declaring COVID's over, but we have these policies still in place.
Hmm.
It's like, are we going to forget about like taking them back then? Or are we just going to keep kids in masks forever
And are
and
we?
just
Oh, go ahead.
mess up a generation of kids who learn about life and people and through language and seeing faces?
And also, that's all very important. But then also, are we going to forget about taking the people to task who forced a lot of this on us? You know,
Yeah.
like, are we just going to end the entire discussion about Fauci's involvement with like EcoHealth Alliance and the potential lab leak and, you know, all the craziness? There's just so many things that are left unanswered. And
Yeah.
I feel like we're on the precipice of just like brushing it all aside and moving on to this next problem, like you just said, because oh, now the war machine and now there's this conflict and we're on to the next thing. And there's just so many people, so many bad actors throughout the whole COVID thing that it's like they're probably just going to get off scot-free and we're going to forget about it and move. I hope we don't, but I have a feeling that's the way it's going to go.
Oh, 100%. And you know, I've always been a liberty-minded person, but I would have never in a million years in 2019, if you told me the world would look the way it looks now, I would have never ever believed it. I
Same.
would have said it maybe in one of these other countries, but in America, the government's going to essentially put you on house arrest, going to tell you you can't participate in society without a medical procedure. That is insane to me. And, you know, we may not on a large scale hold these people accountable, but I will never forget what's happened the last few
Yeah.
years. You know, I don't know if I'm going to have kids someday, but any young person I'm ever around, I'm going to try to educate them on like, this is what happened during this time period. And please don't ever let this happen to you. Um, but I guess the pessimist in me is kind of also leaning towards believing that we're just going to kind of brush past it and pretend like it didn't happen.
That's what we tend to do. We have a collective attention span that's incredibly short, I think.
Yeah.
And also, in general, humans like to avoid conflict. So I think a lot of people are going to be of the mindset that they're happy to, quote, have their freedom back, you know, just sort of let me not make waves. Thank you. They're letting me be normal again. And it's so dangerous because I was talking to somebody, I think it was Maj Toure, who's he's a Second Amendment advocate. He's been on the show a couple times. Black guy, really cool. Like he goes to areas in the hood and teaches
Yeah.
people about the Second Amendment and their rights and stuff. But we were talking about it, and we used the analogy of like from the original Jurassic Park movie where the velociraptors would test the fence just to see if it would shock them in different places and see how far they could get. Like that's
Yeah.
exactly the way the state is with us. They saw how far they could push us. Now they're retracting. Nobody's doing anything about it. And next time they're going to push harder in a different place in our lives. And I truly believe that.
100%. And also, you can't forget that, you know, you mentioned like getting back to normal. I think that people, because again, that attention span is just so short among
Mm-hmm.
humans for whatever reason, people actually forget what normal was before this. Because
Yeah.
again, we can go on and on about how, oh, things are going back to normal. We're lifting things. Kids are still in masks.
Yeah.
Like you still have to show a vaccine in many places. There's still so many, like the California is still holding on to the emergency powers they took, during the pandemic. So it's like, it's scary to hear people say we're getting back to normal, because it's like, I'm not comfortable saying back to normal until every single one of these policies are taken back and people are actually held accountable. I don't think normal comes from just like, oh, there's a few policies left over. It's like, no, those policies are nonsensical and they're harmful to people, worst of all children. And
I agree.
they've erased people's knowledge of what normal is. It's like no one remembers.
That's a good way to put it, and another thing I was just thinking about when you said that is that it's become commonplace. My wife works in a corporate environment, and it's become commonplace even there and in our society in general for people to just ask you personal medical questions as though it's not a big deal, right? That's become normalized. And that wasn't the case 2 years ago. It's like, if you came up and asked me about my vaccine history, I'd be like, fuck off. Like, it's not your business, But now it's just normal. And that's a perfect example of what you're talking about.
Even just like, this is one of the things that I, especially during the thick of it in like 2020, before I moved to Texas, which for the most part here, you don't really feel the effects of COVID. Although again, my friend who lives here, her kids are in masks. So I'm saying that as an adult who doesn't have to feel it.
Yeah.
But, one of the things that was really, really deranged to me about 2020, and the worst of it, was the fact that perfect strangers felt comfortable telling other adult strangers what to do. So this concept of like, if I'm not wearing a mask, you have a right to get in my face and tell me to wear one. This concept of like, you get to ask me if I'm vaccinated. This concept of, one thing happened to me that I still think back and I'm like, just get so mad about, and my blood boils. I was entering an elevator in my building, and the building I was living in, as far as I was concerned, I never signed anything on the lease that required me to wear a mask in my building. So I never did. And that was just my personal choice. And I got into an elevator, and this grown man, and I use that word loosely, funny coming from me, but I use that word loosely for him. He was wearing these thick frame glasses, had like a mask and a shield on. I got in and he started just panicking that I would dare to step in an elevator with him. He physically pushed me out of the elevator.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh, wow. So everyone's just lost their minds now. Everyone's just crazy. Everyone thinks this is normal. Like putting your hands on people for the sake of COVID is normal. Like it's this concept of adults trying to control other adults is scary. We're moving more and more towards collectivism and individualism. And that is obviously antithetical towards my personal outlook on life. I feel like I don't owe anyone anything in this world. I'm even like mad that we have to pay taxes. Like I feel like just because I was born, by virtue of being born in this world, I don't owe anyone anything except my friends and family and people I'm loyal to, right? So this idea that people get to question me what I'm doing or tell me what to do is like, what are you doing?
Yeah, 100%. And that's, if I had to sort of sum up my politics as well, that's kind of where I fall too. I've heard obviously other interviews you've done, like with Rogan and stuff. And I think we have very similar beliefs in terms, like I don't call myself a conservative. I'm just essentially the way you put it, collectivism versus individualism. I'm an individualist, right? I believe in the sovereignty of the human and being able to live and let live, as long as you're not essentially affecting the way I live. I don't give a shit what you do, and you're so right about that. It's just become commonplace to really just infringe on people's rights, for lack of way of putting it, just like that guy feeling like he had the right to push you out of an elevator that's insanity. And anyway, I don't want to be like super negative, but this is unfortunately kind of like what we're up against right now. But I think having conversations about it is the best way to make sure we do the things we've got to do to change it. But
I mean, if we want to maybe spin a positive note, because obviously all this stuff is very dark, I will say that I think that it is promising that we live in a time in history that even though things are so bad, things are so much more visible now than ever.
Yes.
So even though not as many people are like as woken up to sort of the things that we probably agree on that I would want them to be, the corporate press has really made an ass of itself in recent years. I think even though a lot of people have really bought into the COVID stuff, I think a lot of other people who maybe would have blindly trusted, the government and the establishment and falsely believed they had their best interest in mind. I think a lot more people are kind of hip to the fact that it's actually the opposite
Mm-hmm.
than ever before because, there's so much more independent media. You mentioned Rogan. It's like
Mm-hmm.
when Rogan's getting, millions more views than the most popping show on CNN. And I think that we also there's room to say that things are looking up as well.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I think the decentralization of news and information is huge, and it's sort of the way I see it is like it's a can of worms, and the worms have started crawling out of the can, and the establishment is scrambling as best they can to shove them back in, but there's no going back. I mean, CNN is crumbling. It's been kind of glorious to watch, like CNN just falling apart. And I mean, it's beautiful. And then you have, so many independent creators and news people and journalists who are like doing journalism for journalism's sake. And that's beautiful to see. And guys like Joe and what he's doing is just like leading the charge for people like me who's, really a nobody, but it gives me faith in what I'm doing and having more conversations and the fact that, people are going to listen and people are listening more to stuff like this than bullshit ass CNN and MSNBC and even Fox News. Like I like Tucker and some of the stuff he does, but there's a lot of people on Fox I don't even like. They're just kind of
other than Tucker, it's kind of I don't really have interest in anyone. And even some of the stuff sometimes he's kind of like, oh, okay, Tucker. But
of course,
it is glorious in a way because there was never another time in history where this could be possible, where this conversation could even be possible, even just between you and I. Nonetheless, all the huger podcasts like Joe Rogan and stuff, it's like there is an upside to that. And so, I think that trust lost is very difficult to regain, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, your partner cheats on you. You may forgive them, you may even stay with them, but you're not going to regain that trust, at least not fully. And so I think the media has done a lot to lose trust, and I can't imagine them gaining it back anytime soon.
Yeah, no, I think it's a net positive for humanity. I think we are heading in the right direction, and there's just going to be bumps along the way. I mean, they're not going to give up their stronghold on power easily, right? But it's happening, and it's awesome. It's people like you for sure leading the way as far as that goes. I wrote down so many different questions and different things I want to talk about. But first off, I've kind of watched. I went back and watched a lot of your earlier stuff, but I had watched your recent stuff just kind of as it came out, over the last year or so. When I've heard this story about you put that first video up about feminism and kind of went to sleep and it had gone viral, et cetera. Before that, though, before transitioning and everything else, and before getting political, I guess you would say online, were you a political person? Is that kind of where you saw yourself going or anything like that? Or did you just kind of roll with it once it started to happen?
My whole life, I've had really strong opinions. My entire life, even as a child, if I believed something, I believed it. And for you to convince me otherwise was going to be very difficult. And not impossible, but difficult. So I grew up like debating with my mom in the car on the way to school about different things. And I was a debater in school. And, I had never imagined doing it for a living ever. But I always was someone who, like, if I had a conviction, then I had it. Even to the point where like I fell into some like stupid stuff. Like I was vegan for a few years when I was a teenager, and I even got a vegan tattoo. Like what a nightmare. But I try not to look back with too much embarrassment about that because I'm like, you know what? Even though I was wrong, and even though like that was corny, at least I was strong enough to believe in something, because so many people don't believe in anything. So many people can't pinpoint like this is what I think and this is what I believe in. So I don't regret it. But before I started my channel, like I grew up in California my entire life. So even though I was in Northern California, which is more red, it was still California. So I never really felt super safe speaking my opinions. As I got older, I got more right wing as I got older. It's a typical story, but so that's why I made my channel, because I wanted to talk to someone. I just didn't expect it would be all these people.
Isn't it interesting how we feel sometimes as though we can't speak to those in our immediate life? So instead, we we put it on the internet, and
Yeah.
because we're not comfortable talking to the people in our lives, but instead we're broadcasting it to thousands of people. It's kind of
Yeah.
weird how that works, but
Kind of twisted.
yeah, it's
Like, it's
odd.
kind of like, why, I mean, because I'm also someone that, even though political and social commentary are my bread and butter, obviously, I've also made a point to, over the years, be very personal on my channel,
Hmm.
which is why I think I've actually had the longevity I've had, because people care about me, but follow me,
Yeah, they're
and they're
invested.
invested.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, a lot of the stuff I've made videos about, I look back and cringe because it's just so personal, and I would never talk about it now, but it's already said. Um, and I think that is because it's like easier to talk to a screen, even though there's going to be a ton of people watching it, than not having like those friendships in your real life that you feel comfortable enough. But I am at a point in my life now where I feel like I have such good friends, that I can say anything to them. So
Yeah.
uh, I think that's good. You got to have that.
You have to have that. It's so essential. And I've honestly, just in the last 2 years that I started doing this, and I was kind of forced into being more public with what happened to me. I've lost so many quote friends, and then I just realized
Mm,
that they weren't friends. It was just people who were associating with me because it was advantageous in some way. And then
mm,
the net result, when they did that analysis after they kind of found out that I had spoken out against masks publicly, it was too much of a net negative for them to associate with me, and so they just tossed me aside. And but out of that, I found people who don't, they can be completely diametrically opposed to me, ideology wise or anything, but I can talk to them about anything. They can talk to me about anything. Like, it's beautiful. And that's, if anybody listening takes any note from this, like, find people like that in your life, because
yes.
it's amazing. I imagine Michael Malice is kind of like that type of person for you. I know you guys have put out some videos together and stuff. And
Yeah, he's really become like one of my best friends. He's amazing. I was hanging out with him last night and the
I,
night before. We hang out a lot, um and he's been one of those people that I can like pretty much say anything to. And
yeah,
human beings are tribal. And so I relate to losing friends when I started being more vocal about my opinions as well. Um and it sucks, but you really do find your tribe through honesty. And the cool thing about sort of being treated as this like sort of pariah,
hmm,
or outcast when you don't have the right opinions, is that the people you find to be your new tribe, like you said, are not necessarily people that even agree with you, but it's just people that are able to have conversations, which unfortunately is like a skill that not everyone has. And
yeah.
so you lose those people that aren't able to have conversations, but you gain a new tribe, and that's what it's all about.
Yeah, I agree. It's crazy because, like, so I made this video about masks coming from a scientific perspective, like, because I was doing fitness content, and people were like, "Why aren't you wearing a mask?" I put it out saying, "Here are all the reasons why I'm not wearing a mask from my perspective as a former scientist." And I got like annihilated. I lost clients, people blocked me, unfriended me, all that
Wow.
stuff. It was wild. Like, I was so clueless and not expecting that, right? Because I was thinking I'm doing something to help people. Like, yeah, I've got this background in science. Let me explain to you cloth versus N95 and all that stuff. And I was just like a white supremacist and all this stuff.
Isn't that
It
insane?
was so nuts. And I'm like, holy shit, what is going on? And that's when I first started to realize that people's brains are actually broken. Like, they're not
Yes.
thinking logically. And then I made the first post where I was holding up a sign, and it was, "We can disagree and still be friends." And I was like, "There's no way I'll get shit for this." Oh my god, I got so much shit for that. People like, "Oh, so you're friends with people who are racist then, and this and
Right.
that," and it's like,
They
holy
go straight to
shit,
that, right? They go
holy
straight to that.
fuck,
Anytime I've said similar things over the years, because it's true. Like, one of my best friends, Jacqueline Glenn, she's a YouTuber and she's a liberal. And we don't really talk about politics a lot because it depends, when you're diametrically opposed, it's better to talk about
yeah,
other stuff,
sure, yeah,
But even if we did, we'd be fine. And people just don't have that concept. And so that is the thing they say, like, oh, so you could be friends with someone who thinks black people should die. It's like, why do you got to jump to, of course not.
exactly,
And that's not even a political position. That's like
right,
being inhumane. Like,
yeah.
why do you have to jump to that?
It's so crazy. We're
Yeah.
so, I don't even know. It's like beyond tribal at this point. It's just reactionary, emotional. Like, I don't know. like even when you bring up Trump, for example, and try to like talk about something good he did with, say, foreign policy or something, immediately they're like, oh, so you hate black people? And I'm like,
It's just
no, what the
crazy.
fuck is your problem? I'm talking about Israel, but
Yeah.
anyway, it's unfortunate, but that's also why it's been cool to kind of find the sort of group of thinkers and people out there that are more of like the heterodox type folks, and whether it's like you or Malice or Rogan or even like Tim Pool or like Matt Taibbi, who's way more left leaning, and like Crystal and Sagar, like I love hearing all these different opinions and perspectives. And I think that one of the cool things is that there has been sort of this amalgamation, or like a tribe that's formed of people who aren't tribal, just sort of
Yes.
by way of the fact that they're not that way. They're sort of this weird group of differing and varying perspectives. And I think that a lot of people are attracted to that as far as
Yes.
consumers and viewers and everything. And that's why they do like get attracted to Rogan, for example, because he's kind of like the largest figure that represents that, because he'll talk to anybody, and that's the way it should be.
You know why people, I think, are enamored with that is because it reflects real life for a lot of people. A
Yes.
lot of people, even though a lot of people are tribal and will only hang out with people who agree with them, there's a lot of other people who their friend groups and their family are made up of people that are very much different, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I did a stream on Tim Pool's channel a few months ago, and it was like a group of us. It was Michael Malice, me, Alex Jones, Joe Rogan, Tim
Oh
Pool.
yeah, I saw
And
that.
I was just thinking about it because you said like there's this tribe of people who are not tribal. And I was thinking, yeah, because everyone in that room had a different like label, right? You have an anarchist, Michael, you have like a trans center right person, you have like Tim, who's a liberal but disaffected liberal, you have Joe, who I think just calls himself a liberal, and then you have Alex
Yeah.
Jones, who many people would consider very far right. And it's like that is what real life is. Maybe not, as crazy of characters as we all are in real life, but that's people coming together across differences and just shooting the shit and talking, and people are attracted to listening to that because that's actually how you get to the truth, through
Mm-hmm.
having messy conversations, maybe even arguing. You don't get to the truth through like 2 minute soundbite blurbs on a screen on CNN. That's not how you
Yeah.
get to the truth. That's how you get to propaganda. That's how you get to brainwashing. That's how you get to emotional manipulation. But if you just have a bunch of people sitting in a room for hours and talking about things, eventually the best ideas are going to rise to the top. And so that's the benefit again of this new wave that's happening.
Yeah, and even more so these days, you can do that and also do that while like thousands of people watch. And so
Yes.
that spreads through the population that way as well. You and Alex Jones got married, right? How's that going?
You know what's so funny is I went to a comedy show. I actually went to a Rogan show here in Austin, and this guy came up to me and he's like, "You're Alex Jones' wife, right?" And he was completely serious. It was not
Oh
a
my
joke.
God.
He like was really thinking that, and I'm like, "Are you kidding me?"
That's
Um,
amazing. That's amazing.
Alex is so sweet. He really is like, he reminds me of just like a teddy bear. He's not scary. People treat him like he's this like scary figure, but he's the sweetest person ever. He doesn't have like a malicious bone in his body, in my opinion. And I'm not going to sit here and say he gets everything right, because I've told him to his face, like what I said to him, and I've said this on air and to his face, and I say it with all the love I have in the world. I've said, "You are the internet's crazy uncle.
Mm-hmm.
You talk a lot of shit. People tend to tune you out. You're right about a lot of stuff and you're wrong about a lot of stuff. But when you're right, you are so right." And people are like, "Okay, Uncle Alex, I guess that's the truth. Cool." Um, so he's a good person, and it's interesting forming a friendship with someone who is so hated, and there's such a caricature of him in the ether that is
Mm-hmm.
not really him. And I understand it to an extent, because there's also a caricature of me in the ether that's not 100% accurate to who I am, but it's so much more dramatic with him. Obviously, like, he got parodied in the Spider-Man movie. People,
Yeah, that's
he
right.
gets parodied as like this crazy person, and again, he is kind of crazy, but um he's demonized to the point where people, I think it's a bit ridiculous. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think he's a good person, and um yeah, I take everything he says with a grain of salt, as I think you should. um we went to dinner with him a few weeks ago, and it was like a super fun time. And he got everyone's bill, and he was talking to people in the restaurant, very friendly. Like, he's just cool.
Yeah, it's I can tell immediately when someone starts talking about Alex if they've actually not really listened to any of his content or done any
Yeah.
research. Same thing with Joe, or like even you or Tim Pool or any of those more prominent figures. It's like you can recognize the talking points so quickly, and you can tell if someone's actually listened to like JRE for a period of time
Yeah.
or not, because it's just such a canned narrative. And it's like people are nuanced, and they have so many different attributes that are cool, or whatever, and it's like you just label these people and toss them aside, like, oh, Alex is a far right, which is crazy because he was like against George W. Bush and all this stuff. And people just, they don't want to do their research, and it's really
Right.
unfortunate. But
You can totally identify the talking points. Like with Joe, it's like, oh, people will say he's a conservative. Clearly
yeah,
never watched him. He's
which is
not. They'll say
crazy.
he's anti-vaxxer. Clearly he's not. He's pro-choice. People will say, oh, I'm a self-hating trans person. I consider myself to be among the happiest trans people I know.
They do say that about you.
Alex Jones is a far-right conspiracy theorist. Like, yeah, you recognize the I've never watched, but I'm going to talk shit anyways
Yep.
sort of vibe, which is annoying.
It's so annoying. When I was in grad school, like, because I was doing my PhD in biochemistry, I dropped out after 2 years. It wasn't for me. I just didn't want to be a professor. Basically, after I experienced that whole world, but there's so much of that, and it's like Thomas Sowell wrote a book, Intellectuals in Society, I think is what it's called. But basically, when someone achieves like expertise in one particular field, they think that their opinion carries weight in like every other field, and you would see so much of that where people would speak with authority about, like, let's say Alex Jones, and just rattle off talking points, but with authority, because they see themselves as an intellectual, as a smart person. And it's like, you've clearly not done any research, but that's how it gets perpetuated, because then dumb young grad students like me hear that, coming from a professor or someone I regard as intelligent.
Yes.
And then I spout it off as well. And so it's just this, it's like the game of telephone or whatever, but nobody in that entire chain of communication does any actual research or looks at Blaire White or Alex Jones or Joe Rogan or any of these people, and it just perpetuates throughout the population. And it's that's exactly what happens even in the universities. But anyway,
It's true. I mean, like, even when I was in college, I took some gender studies courses, and
Oh boy.
I don't remember if they're mandatory or not. I don't feel like I would have chose to take them, but I did. And the stuff they would talk about was just so like, so you're telling me gender doesn't exist, but it's also this very important thing, and it's performative, but it's biological, but it's not. It's like everything
Yeah.
was so contradictory, and it's like, okay, clearly it's just a bunch of people talking shit, and then they put it in a book, and then we're supposed to take it as fact. And because it comes from a place of, oh, my professor's telling me
Yep.
this,
Yeah.
then it must be true, and it's just not the case.
Yeah, it's a shame. I bought into all of it in university. Like I voted for Obama the first time he ran, because I didn't do any research. I didn't know shit about his platform or anything, but I was just told, if you're not a racist, vote for Obama. That kind of thing. And it's such a shame when I reflect back on it now, and I think about just how dumb it was, and some of the things he did that were just egregious when he was in office. And even to this day, some of like my former grad school friends and stuff would still say that he's like one of the best presidents ever, because we choose to be ignorant about that stuff because it doesn't affect our everyday lives, or at least we don't see it as doing that. But
because the media protects, Democrat presidents.
Yeah, they protect their people.
Interestingly, they don't protect Biden. I mean, they do to a large extent, but not to the extent they protected Obama, probably because he was Black. That's just a fact. Like, I do see even like the liberal media coming out and criticizing Biden to an extent, but to me, Biden's just a meat puppet anyways. So I guess they don't really care about his legacy per se. It was just get Trump out and put anyone in. Democrat presidents are protected, and you kind of like, so I wasn't old enough to vote until Trump, like that. I was 18 when I could vote for Trump.
I feel so old now. Thanks, Blaire.
But I for sure would have probably voted for Obama because I was told to by the media. And I was presented with this very black and white situation of this is the good guy and this is the bad guy. oh, Romney's a racist, McCain's a racist, Bush is a racist. So once you're, even though I'm not like that old, once you're alive long enough, you see the bullshit for long enough, and it's like, okay, so every Republican ever is racist,
Yep.
and we ignore every racist thing the Democrat politicians do, to the point where Trudeau can be in blackface, where Biden can say all the crazy ish he said about black people and gay people and every other group of people, to the point where Obama could be anti-gay marriage until the last second of his presidency. And we're just supposed to take that. That's bizarre to me.
It really
It's the
is.
same with I'm not going to pretend to be super educated on climate change, and we don't even have to get into it that deep. But this is just an example of if you're alive long enough, you remember we were told in 2008 that it was going to be the end. No more polar ice caps, no more polar bears. Florida's going to be underwater. And then they said, you know what, 2012. And they said, you know what, by 2015. Then they said, you know what, by 2020. And here we are in 2022 with nothing happening. And it's just like the amount of BS that we're spoon fed is so mind numbing. And again, I'm not educated on climate change, but just the fact that I've been gaslit into believing the world's going to end my entire life. You have to think about how kind of like deep and dark that is to like tell children the world's going to be over before they're even like 10 or 11.
It's awful.
And that's been my whole life growing up in the California school system. So it's just BS.
Yeah. Well, I can, with the climate change thing, and this has a lot of overlap with the COVID thing too, in some ways, because so when I was in grad school, I got all of my fun. I got a fellowship from the National Science Foundation because of the research I was doing had potential applications in the context of climate change. So it was I was looking at how physiological systems adapt to big changes in temperature and stuff like that. And so naturally, when you talk about climate change and like the oceans acidifying or getting warmer, it's good to know like how that affects the genes of different species. So I got a bunch of funding for it to do that research. And I was only concerned with like the actual biochemistry and stuff. I didn't care about climate change, but that's where the money was. So that's how I got all my funding. But then this is what happened. And this is the important part, is that I specifically chose not to dig in on the climate change debate because I was afraid that if I did come across information that really stood out to me as being contradictory to the mainstream narrative, that I'd have to talk about it and that would put my funding in jeopardy. So this is why, like, I never spoke about it. I took their money. I was happy to take their money to do my research. And now I know for a fact, because I've talked to some colleagues who are in like postdocs and stuff at universities now who get funding from the NIH, and they would tell me in private, in confidence, that they agree with a lot of these things I've talked about COVID publicly, but they wouldn't dare ever say a thing because they get their funding from NIH and NIAID and the NSF, all these government organizations. So people ask all the time, like, if it's really that masks don't work, or if it's really that the vaccine does have these adverse effects on certain tissues in the body, et cetera, whatever the particular topic is, there would definitely be scientists talking about it. It's like, you guys don't understand. Their money is at stake. They're not going to talk about it. And that's exactly what's happening.
And the few that do get banned off social media, or it causes a huge controversy where Rogan's at risk of losing his podcast because he dared to have them on, you know?
It's awful.
It's like people say trust the science as if everyone in science is trustworthy.
Yeah.
And that's just not the case. And, you know, to me, it's so interesting too. Like, we don't have to get back on the COVID stuff, but like, so everyone is saying rest in peace COVID because now war is going on. And it's like, if you ever doubted that COVID lockdowns and policies and all this was political, does it not strike a bell to some of these people that believed it all the way along that it disappears just coincidentally like days before we're going to war? It's like, does that not seem odd to you? And if it doesn't, why doesn't it? Because I can't imagine looking at that and not at least feeling like it's suspicious.
Well, not even that. Before war, whatever we want to call this particular conflict, broke out, they were already starting to reel it back because midterms are approaching.
Exactly.
So it's so obviously political. And, you know, honestly, all I can do is just laugh about some of this stuff at this point. It's just like, what the fuck else can we do? Like, we'll talk about it. I'll make sure my daughter's protected, my family's good, but otherwise I'm just going to laugh at these fucking clowns in office and what they're doing. But
if you don't laugh, you'll cry, right?
It's honestly the truth. It's so depressing sometimes. I'm like, because it comes from a place of like, guys, we're better than this. Like, we're smarter than this, you know, like they want us to hate each other so that they can do their thing. And anyway, that's I could go down that rabbit hole, but I want to ask you. So I said, I've got a few questions. First off, what was it like working with Tom MacDonald?
Oh, it was so cool. He is a great guy, and so is Nova, his girlfriend, who actually worked with him on all his videos.
They
It was
crush it.
great. I can't imagine another. For people who don't know, I was in his music video Snowflakes, and I can't imagine I'm ever going to get the opportunity again unless he had me on another one, which maybe, I don't know. But please, Tom, have me on another one.
Yeah,
But
have her on, Tom.
it's not every day that like a political and social commentator also gets to be like in a music video like that. So
Yeah.
I feel like that's one of those things I'm gonna look back on when I'm like old and be like, that was cool when I was in my 20s and like got to be in a music video. And interestingly, it's like, of course, the corporate press doesn't give him the credit for this, but he was the first rapper to ever put a trans woman in a music video. And it just so happens he's a conservative. So it's just cool. I love to be a part of things that break the narrative. I love to be a part of things that are unexpected. And that was definitely unexpected. I was actually traveling when he hit me up to do it.
Okay.
And I canceled my trip early and I went home. I was like, yes, I'm coming. So it was cool.
That's awesome. So he reached out to you about doing it.
Yeah. Apparently the story was that Nova had been a supporter for years, his girlfriend, and then showed him my videos. And then together they were like, we need to have Blaire in the video. So they did it. And I'm eternally grateful. To this day, it's one of the coolest things I've ever done. And I'm sure it always will be. So
yeah, it was awesome. And for those listening who maybe don't know, if you've been under a rock somewhere, check out Tom MacDonald's music. Like the video production quality and what Nova does, like the fact that it's just really like them, it's insane what they create. And from that perspective, like the small amount of video editing that I do for this thing, I'm like, I look at what they do there and I'm like, holy shit, they fucking crush
it's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's wild. And of course the topics they talk about are so relevant. But anyway, that was awesome. I wanted to ask what that was like because I'm all about getting out of your comfort zone. And it seems like that was kind of one of those moments for you. And it was cool to see.
You know what? Surprisingly, like, I think for the first like 30 seconds, I was like, what do I do? I'm like sitting on like a tire with like fire behind me. It's like, what do you want me to do? But then they started playing the music and I was like, you know what? Fuck it. Like, let's just do this. Yeah. So it was surprisingly easier than I would have thought, but yeah.
Do you ever think you'd want to do more like acting or anything like that? Or was that just kind of a one-time cool experience type thing?
I don't know. I would be open to something like that. But, one of the things that I've always sort of kept in my mind since the beginning of all this, because I fell into doing what I do. I didn't set out to do it as a living, or I would never in a million years think my life would be what it is right now.
Wow.
But because of that, I have always had this mindset of like, just go with the flow. Take everything as it comes. Don't take anything too seriously. I'm not going to say don't have goals, because I have goals, but don't even set yourself up to like need this one accomplishment. Like, ride this train until the wheels fall off. Yep. And whatever you accomplish along the way is what you accomplish. And that's how I've like sort of added up these really weird but awesome accomplishments, like being in a music video. I would have never made that one of my goals, but just because when you're just you and you just do your thing, stuff comes along. So it's kind of my mindset.
Yeah. People listening, I think it definitely heed that advice. Like it's so important, because if you have like this rigid structure of how your life has to look or what you're going to do, you'll let opportunities pass you by and maybe not even notice them. Like one thing that I did this past year, kind of like very similar. I was in a full length feature horror film, and they literally like reached out to me on Instagram. They're like, we really like your look. We've checked out your podcast. You know how to talk. It was literally like that simple. They're like, would you like to be in this movie? And so I played like a pretty major role in this full length. It was actually shot in Texas, in East Texas. We were in the woods for like a week. It was awful. It was like the middle of summer.
Cool.
But it's in post-production now, so it hasn't been released or anything. But yeah, I was just like, I never wanted to be an actor and never wanted to, like, never thought I'd be in a movie, but same deal. I just rolled with it, and it was one of the coolest experiences I've ever had. And who
That's
knows, maybe
awesome.
I'll do it again if this, is successful. But um,
Yeah.
that's so. I wanted
That's
to
what,
ask you
isn't
about
life
that.
so cool though?
It,
Like life is just so cool that you can just end up in rooms you'd never expect and doing stuff you'd never expect. Like that's awesome.
Yeah, 100%. Dude, I mean, I would have never a year and a half, 2 years ago thought that I'd be doing this, like a podcast and all the social media crap and all that stuff because I
Yeah.
mean, just kind of that's what happened. That's how life happened to me. And if I'd been resistant to it and not just rolled with it, then who knows, I definitely wouldn't be as happy because this, like, I love this. I love getting to talk to people like you, and even though I get tons of hate online, which I know is probably laughable when I look at like the size you are and the amount of crap you probably have to deal with, but like it's worth it. And you get to the point where you don't even read that shit and you just delete it and it's
Yeah.
like whatever. But
And it's very freeing as well. There's something to be said
yes,
about it. It's like no one can sit here and lie and say it doesn't feel bad when you get like a hateful comment or whatever. Like there is a part of you, even if you're very strong, that's like, ouch. But at the same time, there's something very freeing about not being held by the expectations of these people.
yeah,
Like anyone who is going to say that like you're an asshole or you're a white supremacist or that I'm an asshole or that I'm a white supremacist, it's like you can look at it as like, oh, wow, that's really hurtful. Or you can look at it as like, I'm free from you. I will never live up to anything you want me to be. So I never have to now. I'm free to do what
ooh,
I want,
I
you
like
know?
that. Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. I used to be, because that is such like an egregious accusation, calling someone a
Yes.
racist, and I always took that, or at least in the beginning, I took it to heart. Now I just laugh when people say it, but I would try to defend myself, and I think that's with that accusation, that's like the worst thing you can do because
Mm-hmm.
you just you never win, and they don't care anyway. They don't care about your reasons for why you're not or whatever. I mean, I'm literally in a biracial marriage, and I have a mixed race child, and people use that to say actually as a reason that I'm racist. They're like, you want to exert your power over her and all this stuff. And I'm like, for fuck's sake, if
My
that's
God.
yeah, if that's what you're going to say, then we're done here. We can't have any sort of meaningful discourse. And, our definitions are definitely different. So,
That's the thing. They
yeah,
have an answer for everything. So, say someone calls you a racist and you have a bunch of, minority friends and you're like, "Hey, my whole friend group's, black people and whatever other race you want to think of." They have an answer for that. Oh, so you have black friends. It's like,
exactly.
well,
Yeah.
would a racist have black friends? I don't think they would. It's like,
Well, they've
would a
changed the
racist date
definition of
someone?
racist. They've completely turned the definition on its head, and
Yeah.
it's gotten so watered down and has so many different meanings that it means nothing anymore. You know?
If you can be called racist for not wanting to wear a mask, then clearly it doesn't mean anything,
Yeah.
you know?
Oh my God. Like the whole anti-racism narrative. I don't know if you've even like I've suffered through reading some of those books just because I wanted to see what it's all about, like Ibram X. Kendi and some of these people. It's just all like you said earlier about some of the texts when you were in college that were just straight fucking made up shit. Like that's what this
Yeah.
is. It's
It's mind numbing.
it's preposterous, and they're making ass loads of money taking advantage essentially of people's emotions who don't
Yes.
want to be labeled as this bad word and they want to be a good person. But
Well,
okay,
because in a world that makes sense, you would do the work to come to the conclusion that people are racist or whatever.
right,
This work starts with the
it starts there.
conclusion that
Yeah.
everyone is, or all white people are racist, and here's why. Like they work backwards.
Hmm.
And so there's no disagreement to be had because it starts with that premise. And it's just so toxic and it's not representative of reality. I mean, clearly, like there's racial tensions among groups. Clearly, there's stereotypes held by certain groups against other groups. But this, like, to not make a pun here, but this black and white narrative that it's like that it is just black and white, and
Yeah.
that it's not like complicated racial relations through all groups. It's like, how are we ever going to fix it if we're not even actually identifying the problem? If you reduce it to like a Disney level of understanding of like white people bad, black people good, how is that doing anyone any good? It's also
Yeah.
setting up, and I recognize this as a minority myself being trans, and I'm also biracial, I'm half Spanish, but um, you know, believing you are a victim believing you are under the foot of someone more powerful than you, even when it's true, is so toxic. It's
Yes.
so self-defeating. And you get this adversarial relationship with society that benefits no one except actually the people that you're believing are above you. You're setting that prophecy up for yourself, you know?
Hmm.
Like that's why whenever I guess just because of who I am, I have a lot of trans people who are my friends who kind of like maybe a little younger that look up to me and want to maybe live their life in a similar way. And the main thing I tell them is never ever look at it as a disadvantage. Even though there are things about it that may make your life harder or whatever, look at it as an obstacle to overcome, you know, because once you do, you're so powerful and you're so free. Going back to the being free thing, it's like if you can make shit happen for yourself despite everyone telling you you can't, you win.
Right. And you're stronger than the people who didn't have to, right?
Mm-hmm.
By result of that. And that's like, it's similar to like what you said earlier when you were talking about how even if you tell a trans person that they're more likely to commit suicide if they don't um, get surgery or what have you.
Yeah.
It's like it can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. Well, I look at it the same way with like my daughter, who's a little brown girl, being told in school that she is just intrinsically part of an oppressed class, right? And that the little boy who looks like me sitting next to her, and oh, by the way, also daddy in general, who's a white male, is just naturally an oppressor. And it's so terrible to tell children that, right? Like it, even if like what you just said, even if it's the case, even if somehow by way of history and the way everything unfolded, we are just intrinsically oppressive, us white people and people of color are oppressed. What utility is there to telling a child that? Right? You should still tell them that if you work hard and you get after it and overcome obstacles in life, you can be successful too. So you're
Yeah.
just setting them up for failure, just like what
Yeah.
you said earlier about the trans issue
Yeah.
with
It's
kids.
like, why tell kids that killing themselves is even on the table? Like, and where are
Exactly.
all these people telling them that it's not the answer, that it's never the right answer, that, you know, your life can be so much better?
Yeah.
Where are all the people telling, you know, kids like your daughter or, you know, kids on my mom's side of the family where my mom's side of the family is brown? Where are all the people telling them that they can win? Like you can win, you can be
Exactly.
successful, you can have the life that you want, because despite everything that makes this country so jacked up right now, and despite all the, you know, hiccups in our history and, you know, real examples of oppression that have happened throughout the history of this country, it's still the country where you can be anything and do
Hmm.
anything. And the fact that we're kind of getting away from that is very sad.
I was talking to someone recently about this, specifically with Black Americans, talking about LeBron James saying that Black people are being hunted in the streets. I'm sure you're familiar with that line when
Yeah.
he said that. And we were talking about the fact that there are so many other things he could say about Black Americans. Like, for example, America has more Black millionaires than any other country in the world by an order of magnitude, right? There are more Black females going to college now, I believe, percentage wise, than white males, even. Like, there are so many great positive statistics you can say about Black Americans to uplift children and to tell
Yes.
them how much opportunity is out there, especially as a public figure. But instead, you're telling them that they're being hunted in the streets, which of course isn't true when you look at the crime data and everything. But um,
That's
it's
what's sad.
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It doesn't add up with what's really happening. I mean, it's complicated because obviously there is a history between Black people and the police, and
of
no one can
course.
doubt that for a very long time there was a very, very toxic relationship between those two groups. However, if you look at the stats, it's just not true. And it's what good is it doing to tell people and to scare them into thinking that they can't walk the streets without fear of being gunned down by a cop? I mean, why would you want, especially your own people, to be living under that anxiety and that fear and that self-defeating vibe?
Yeah, yeah, it pains me, and look, I get told all the time. I'm sure you do too, that essentially I don't get to have an opinion about these issues because I'm white, and it's not my quote lived experience or what have you. Like I get a lot of messages like that, which is funny because I also get messages telling me that I've lived a life of white privilege. And I'm like, well, how do you get to tell me about my lived experience, but I don't get to talk about, how is this one way? How do you know I've lived a life of white privilege? But anyway, it sucks because what happens apparently is, and I've seen a lot of people, especially on the left, tweet about this, like, oh, I had to have the conversation with my son or with my daughter, where they essentially sit them down and have the conversation. Like, look, you're a black person in America. Here's the deal. The cops hate you. White people are evil, whatever it may be. And it's like, it pains me that that's even a thing. Like, I had to have the quote, the talk with them about that. And you're just setting them up to, like, imagine being a kid walking down the sidewalk thinking that white people are actually by nature oppressive and there's some sort of actual hierarchy, or that cops are out to get you. Like, it would be awful to grow up that way. And
Yeah.
it's just,
And let's just be real as well. And people maybe aren't even ready to hear this, but if you actually take a look at what's happening in society, I think white people are more timid than they've ever been throughout history and
yeah,
scared to offend people. And I know I feel this, especially in recent years as a trans person. I feel people like walking on eggshells around me, like they don't want to say the wrong thing. I was at a party last night where I'm the first one to crack a trans joke. I'm the first one to call myself a man or call myself a she-male or just make a dick joke or whatever. I'm the first one. And I made one about myself. And like,
people are
even
scared to
though my
laugh.
close friends, I saw them like questioning if they should laugh.
Oh my God.
They were like, oh, and I'm like, you guys can laugh. And then they cracked up about it. But it's like, you shouldn't need my permission to laugh. I'm clearly having a crack at myself. Like, it just sucks. And it's not a great way to live. I don't want to live like that.
No, and you're right. And even with police, for example, and I'm not denying the fact that there is police brutality that exists, and there's a lot of changes that need to be made, especially with like mental health for police officers. And it's so taxing mentally for these people. But I have a buddy who's in the NYPD. I've had him on the show before, and he said that there's actual stats that look at this. There have been studies that have been done. They're actually more hesitant to use force with a black person because they're terrified of ending up on headlines or some video being made. And so what you have, though, is just this distillation of between millions and millions of interactions. There's a handful that are awful. I mean, nobody's denying that George Floyd was awful, right? But that's what the media shows, and they make you think that is the norm. Whereas there was a man, I don't know if you're familiar with Tony Timpa. I think he was down in Florida, white man, did the exact same thing to him as George Floyd. This was before George Floyd. I think it was like maybe 2018 or something. For 12 minutes, they had their knee on his neck and back, his face pushed down into the ground, and he ended up dying. Exact same way as George Floyd, but you never heard about it because he was a white man. And so it's like the media plays such a role in elevating stories and then suppressing other stories to where like perception is truly reality. Like people genuinely think that like white people don't get killed by the cops and the cops hunt black people. And it's like, that's not the case. The stats don't bear that out at all. But anyway, the
corporate press is the enemy of the people. And I fully believe that.
Yes.
I think the current state of journalism in the corporate press right now, their sole intent is to cause anxiety among the general population to enact things in the direction they want them to go. Yeah. And that is so sad. I mean, they have the whole world thinking COVID's the plague. They have the whole world thinking COVID is the measles or it's insane. And, again, I am hopeful it's going to change. I don't want to make it into a negative thing. I think it's going to change for the better, but I think that things are going to get worse before they get better. If that makes sense.
Yeah. And I agree with that sentiment. The corporate press is the enemy of the people. I think if more people directed their anger towards the corporate press instead of a political party, I mean, all the political parties basically suck too, but like it's crazy, and they're doing it for dollars. Like that's the worst part is like they know that that's what gets clicks and that's what gets their ratings because they're on life support, and it just sucks. So anyway, fuck the corporate.
And they're
press.
Even worse than politicians because for a long time, and I've kind of come to this realization recently, I'll be the first one to talk about politicians that I believe are evil because I believe they are evil, but I think there's so much less evil than the corporate press. You look at Newsom in California, governor. Mm-hmm. He's enacted a lot of crazy stuff in California, oppressive tyranny, seizing emergency powers he shouldn't have. But if you think about it, the corporate press, what would he do if he did anything but that? He would lose all the favor of the positive headlines he gets from the media, because
That's true.
that's what their interest is. They are pro lockdown, they are pro mask, they are pro vaccine passport. So the media is worse than Newsom in the sense that Newsom's just doing what he kind of has to do, even though he might do it on his own. But I don't think it would last as long if it wasn't for the media hyping it up for all these years. So it's like the media really, more than anything, even more than politicians, is the enemy.
Yeah, I think it's this gross mutualism between the two evil, fucking disgusting institutions. But I don't know how much time you have. I never asked you. Are you okay? Do you have a hard stop or?
I can do another question or two.
Okay. All right. Because I want to ask you this because it's something I've thought about a lot, and I think you're the perfect person to ask. So, as you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of sort of spin-offs from just sort of the basic trans man, trans woman existence. Now there's a million different pronouns. There's non-binary, gender fluid, all these different things that sort of have sprung out of that.
Yeah.
And and some of this is from like Abigail Schreier's work, but like, do you think that some of those sort of made up identities are created because you notice that a lot of it is like white women, right? Like who fall into these. Do you think some of that is a result of, because they're not intrinsically part of like an oppressed class or a victim class, if they do that, like Demi Lovato coming out as non-binary, for example,
right.
Now she's part of this minority oppressed class, quote unquote. Like, do you think that some of that is because of that? Because otherwise you're just a white chick and you live a pretty damn good life. Do you think some of it comes out of that?
100%. Our culture is one that rewards victimhood, and it awards, a sob story, frankly. And so you think about it, and like, now Demi Lovato is this like queer, non-binary, essentially just got a haircut. But before that, what was she? She was a very wealthy white woman.
Yep.
You are on top of the totem pole. You are above white men. You are above Black people. You are a rich white woman. You have the ultimate pedestal and power in this country in terms of hierarchy and a social ladder. So the only thing above that is like, you need a sob story. You need a reason to people to think you're oppressed. And it's sad because, a lot of these identities, non-binary and every other word, can't keep up. They're springing up at alarming rates among the same population. And Abigail talks about this, that typically and historically have been cutters, have had eating disorders. It's young girls. And what's interesting is that it's actually the opposite of what we have historically viewed, the statistics of trans people. Trans people, transsexuals, it usually was, the gender dysphoria was present in young boys, and most transsexuals were male to female.
Right.
Now it's the opposite. So you have to wonder why all of a sudden what used to be a primarily male condition is now being seen amongst these young girls. And a lot of it is social pressure. A lot of it is, there's no reason why entire friend groups should be transitioning, but that's happening. It's a need for attention, and for, if you're a middle class little white girl coming up in the suburbs, like, it almost seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but it kind of does. It's like, why wouldn't you? Especially when they glorify it so much, and it's like, you have no other claim to victimhood. You've had a pretty damn good life. And so I've always thought about it kind of that way, like with Demi Lovato and some of these people. It's like, why else would they do that, right? Like, if you asked her what non-binary means, I mean, she couldn't even give you a legit definition. I mean, I don't think most people
she would stumble over her words.
100%. All right. Well, cool. So my suspicion there is justified then. So I got like a ton of like questions from people where they were asking some version of questions about your boyfriend. which is like, I guess they're fans of yours who ended up going on to my question, and because they knew your boyfriend's name and stuff. But the main
Yeah.
question was if you two are still together, or I guess it's fiance, not boyfriend. Sorry.
Yeah, we're still together.
Okay,
I
guys.
have definitely pulled back from posting as much as my personal life as I have in the past. Just because I felt, and this, I'm not saying this with any amount of ego, this is just kind of my reality. As I sort of grow in terms of being more of a public figure, I'm realizing more and more the importance of keeping relationships that are very important to me private. So
Yeah.
the downside is like when you don't post with someone, people are like, oh, so they're broken up, you know. And even with my friends, if I don't post with a friend for a while, they're like, oh, they're not friends anymore. But yeah, we are together.
Okay. Y'all hear that?
Yeah.
So you don't have to keep asking. But it was crazy. I was like,
That's
where are all these
so funny. You got that.
so many questions? I was like, all right, fine, I'll ask her. But
Wow.
yeah, I agree. And I've actually talked to my wife about this because I don't show her much. And for a long time, I wasn't showing her at all because she has like a corporate job and all this stuff. And so many people just assumed I was like a single dad or whatever. And then finally I was like, you know what? I'm going to like at least post your picture. I hope you're okay with it. But like showing my daughter, I'm going to do that a lot less as she gets older and stuff. And then, because I want it to be her decision whether she wants to,
Yeah.
you know, because it's weird. Like I have like no following compared to you, but in my little town, I'll be out and someone will come up and be like, hey, how's Carter doing? I'm like, who are you? You know, like,
Of course.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's weird.
It's a weird thing. And, you know, you have to sort of learn to draw the line of privacy. And our loved ones didn't sign up for this, you know,
Right.
we did.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
it's a weird balance.
Shit. We didn't even really sign up for it, I guess, in the beginning, knowingly. It just
Yeah.
kind of happens.
Yeah. I definitely had to adjust to it, I guess, rather than sign up for it.
Definitely. Okay. So, I know I've taken a lot of your time and you've been very gracious with it. So I appreciate that. And I
This has
always
been
wrap up
fun.
with guests. Yeah. I mean, I could talk about this shit with like-minded folks forever, but,
Yeah, me too.
um, last thing I like to end on is, and I do it with everyone, if you could give one piece of advice to young people today, and it doesn't necessarily have to be young trans people or any particular demographic of young people, just like young Americans or whatever, one piece of advice in 2022, what would you tell them?
Be an individual. We live in a society that is so collectivist now, even more so than when I grew up. And being an individual is the key to success, in my opinion. Living your own life. Don't live by the expectations of others. Don't live by the desires of others. Um, Keep your circle small. Be loyal. Work hard, and also choose to be happy, because happiness is very much a choice in most situations, not all, but in most situations you can choose to be happy. And you know, even if you don't end up rich or successful or everything you want, what really matters at the end of the day is you being happy, because when you're on your deathbed, money's not going to matter. It's going to be those connections you have with your loved ones and the loyalty that you kept to them. So yeah.
Exactly. I love it. That's beautiful. Blaire, I'm sure people know where to find you, but just in case there's like a person listening who doesn't, where can people find you?
Yeah, you can just search me on any platform, Blaire White, and I'll pop up, and have fun. There's a lot of stuff out there.
There is. But anyway, if you guys aren't familiar with Blaire, check her out, look at her videos. And like I said in the beginning, especially like when you feature the detransitioners and stuff, I think it's super, super important conversations that you're having and showcasing. And thank you for doing that. And I appreciate
Thanks.
your time. And yeah,
Yeah, thanks for
until next
having me. It
time.
was so fun.
Yep, likewise. All right, Blaire, thank you.